Okay, hello and welcome everybody to this latest webinar from Cerium, and we're joined today by our friends at Razor Secure. We've got quite a lot of ground to cover, so I won't hang around too long. I just want to start though by introducing you to the topic and to cover some housekeeping notes. Today we're looking at the particular needs and issues surrounding access management in the context of the Network and Information Systems regulations, which affect a broad range of essential services. Although a lot of today's session will be reviewing NIS and the related cyber assessment framework in the context of the NHS, it has a much broader scope, as we'll uncover as we go through this. We'll have a bit of time looking at the regulations and the framework, but most of today's session will be demonstrating how to address those requirements with some live demo. But before we get into the content of today's session, I'd just like to get some housekeeping out of the way. This session is being recorded. In the next few days, we'll be sending you a link that you can share with your colleagues, or so that you can review the session again at your leisure. All lines on the webinar are muted, apart from the presenters, but I would still like to hear from you. So anytime, if you've got any comments or questions about the content, don't wait until the end. Please do submit the questions as you think of them. And you can do that through the questions tab or panel in the GoToWebinar console that you have on your screen. Finally, if you have any technical issues, like you can't hear me, I can shout louder, that's fine. Just let us know through the questions console as well. Right, let's get started. We'll begin by introducing ourselves, so that you know who's speaking as we get into the material here. There we are. My name is Mark Warren. I'm in the product marketing team here at Cerium. I'm fairly new to Cerium, but before that I've had really over 30 years now of experience working with software tool vendors and as a customer of configuration management and security tools. And today I'm joined by Alex Cowan of Razor Secure.
Hi everyone, my name is Alex Cowan. I'm the founder and CEO of Razor Secure. I've been working in cybersecurity for more than 10 years. Across a range of industries, including gaming and critical infrastructure like rail and aviation. And we'll talk a bit more about what Razor Secure does later and how we help companies comply with the NIST directive.
Perfect, thanks Alex. And we also have Tom with us for the technical brilliance and the demo later. So Tom.
Good afternoon everybody. Similar to Mark, I am relatively new to Cerium. However, prior to that, I spent a couple of years providing consultancy services for a number of PAM vendors in this space, and also working directly with another PAM vendor. So I've got quite a few years behind me of experience in designing, implementing, and ensuring the success of a number of PAM projects.
Perfect, thanks Tom. So we've mentioned Cerium and Razor Secure already, so just in case you haven't met either of us before, just a quick few words about who we are. And Cerium are a UK-based leader in privileged access management. We have been featured as a Gartner Cool vendor and highlighted as a leading solution for privileged task management in the latest Magic Quadrant from Gartner. And you'll see some of that as we get into the demo later. And Alex at Razor Secure?
So at Razor Secure, we provide intrusion and anomaly detection software. And broadly, this is for compliance with Objective-C of the NIST directive. So Objective-C deals with detection of both known and unknown attacks, and so we use our machine learning to detect both of those potential incidents. As a company, we advise and support leaders in rail and in aviation across the UK and Europe.
Perfect, super, thanks. So let's get the introductions out of the way. Let's take a quick look at the content of today's session. The first part of this is to review the NIS regulations and in particular the assessment framework. In particular today we'll be focusing on section B2, which sets out the requirements for privileged access management. But as Alex has already kind of suggested, there's much more to identity and access management in the framework, which he'll be covering as well. And of course that's really the heart of the whole framework. If you can't control access and privilege management, then it's really hard to comply with the rest of the requirements of the framework. Then we'll dive into demo and really see what this looks like in a real world situation, actually trying to take control of privileged accounts. And then we'll get into a Q&A and particularly some recommendations for how you can start your projects in privileged access management and recommendations for moving forward, and some other resources that we'll share with you later as well. So let's get started, and with that, I'll pass over to Alex.
All right, thanks very much, Mark. So to give you the introduction to the NIS directive, so it is an EU directive. It was first released in 2016, and essentially from that date, each EU member state then has 2 years to implement it into law. So in the UK, it became law in May 2018, and it's not to be confused with GDPR, which came in at the same time. And other member states have been a little bit slower sometimes in implementing it, but it's pretty much implemented across the whole EU now. So it applies to groups that are broadly defined as operators of essential services. So that includes companies that supply critical services to healthcare, drinking water, oil, gas, energy, air, rail, road, and digital infrastructure as well. So digital infrastructure is quite a broad term, but typically that's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and also some software as a service providers as well. If you provide a critical software as a service component, then actually you could fall under NIS as well. NIS itself is enforced by competent authorities, so each industry has its own competent authority. So, for example, for air, it's the Civil Aviation Authority. For rail and road, it's the Department for Transport. So if the NIS directive applies to you, or if you think it might apply to you, typically the first place to look is find out who the competent authority is for your industry, and then make contact with them. They will all have groups within their organization that are responsible for receiving cyber assessment frameworks and for issuing guidance to the industry. And so that would be one of the first contact points. Overall, the implementation is managed by the National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK. So NCSC publishes very good guidance, and there's actually a link in the slides here for the NIS directive guidance collection. And that includes information about how it's being implemented. So broadly, it's broken into these 4 key areas, and that is organization, so how you manage your organization. It's how you manage your processes. So our topic today, identity management, typically comes under processes. It's how you manage detection of cybersecurity incidents and events, both known and unknown events. And also, how do you manage your response and recovery? So those are the 4 key areas, and typically they're referred to as A, B, C, and D, so in that order that I've just described. The reason that this is being implemented is essentially because it's designed to improve the critical infrastructure of the UK and the European Union overall, to make sure that if these systems are attacked, they don't end up in an unsafe way or cause a major incident that could affect the overall country. So our main topic today is going to be around Objective B. So this is what I would describe as process driven. So it's about protecting against a cyber attack, and B2 is particularly focused on identity and access control. When it comes to the cyber assessment framework itself, it's generally broken down into these numbered different areas. So B2 is one of these overall objectives, and then there are sub-objectives beneath these as well. So there are 4 different sub-objectives for the B2, and today we'll focus on privileged access management. So privileged access management, when you're reviewing your organization and trying to understand whether you're compliant with the cyber assessment framework, you're essentially presented with this table which has a set of statements for each category, a red, amber, green approach to understanding whether you're compliant with the cyber assessment framework or not. So red is if you're not achieving, and there will be a statement in there that may match your organization's current competence levels. There was an amber, which is partially achieved, and there's green, which is achieved. And essentially, you have to go through and evaluate fairly, are we red, amber, or green? And if essentially any of the statements are true within red or amber, then you will fall into that category. So in order to achieve full compliance, you need to ensure that you comply with all of the statements within the achieved green category. Next one. So the key requirements for B2C are around having dedicated separate accounts for privileged system access, so identifiable accounts. It's also about having temporary time-bound accounts, so whether that's accessed from internal or remote, being able to say, yes, we have temporary time-bound accounts for privileged access into our systems. It's about having regular user access rights reviews, so that this is done either on a time basis, but also on a new hire, leaver, or change of job role. It's also about having strong authentication methods, so multi-factor or two-factor authentication. And lastly, it's also ensuring that you regularly review your user activity, so that you have the records in place, you have regular processes in place to review how your privileged access is being used, and that you're enforcing least privilege for the users that you're managing. So lastly, the challenges to achieving the cyber assessment framework. So these are some of the common trends that we see within industries we work in. They are account sharing, so maybe you have more than one admin or sharing of admin accounts. It can be possible that you have complex usernames or passwords that people have trouble remembering. So an example I have of this quite recently, we had a video demonstrating an aviation maintenance depot, and they actually had the username and password stuck on a piece of tape on top of the screen. So that's definitely not NIST compliant. It's also around third-party access. So do you have the systems in place to ring fence external staff access, or to only give them temporary access as needed? So you're just giving them this least privilege access and only time-bound access when they're due to be working on your systems. And lastly, the complex estate. So how do you manage large numbers of complex systems, and how do you manage authentication for privileged users across this complex estate? So these are some of the real key challenges to managing the cyber assessment framework. So I'll hand over to Tom now to do a demo of the Cirium platform.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Alex, for running through those slides there. Typically, what we've found and what we have discovered is that compliance with, be it CAF or NIST or any other relevant compliance is often achieved by nature of a successful PAM implementation. So I'll take you through the architecture behind the scenes of the PXM platform, which is our PAM platform, and ultimately how we'll take you on that journey to achieving a successful implementation, which also then ticks the boxes of B2 on the framework as well. So currently, under the hood, the PXM platform is available to download from Cirium in a OVA or VHD file. We are completely virtualized, so you download your PXM platform, which is an Ubuntu server which runs its own internal Postgres database under the hood, in which we store the credentials and the audit logs and everything else. The system itself is encrypted to AES-256, and each implementation will receive its own unique master encryption key as a form of a break glass. The PXM platform itself is one virtual machine that covers 99% of all of the PAM activity. That is launching of recorded sessions to RDP and SSH sessions, the automation of tasks, looking at privileged behavioral analytics, and then also the actual core PAM, the automated management of passwords. The second part of that will be a Windows server that we will deploy alongside it, notably the PXM map server, which stands for Managed Application Server. This kind of covers the 1% if you wanted to record sessions that use a graphical client, MMC snap-ins, for example, web sessions, Checkpoint Smart Dashboard, for example. If we want to isolate and broker sessions to devices that just use that particular client, then we can implement that when we would install our map server, which would run on a Windows server, as long as our map server is installed alongside that as well. We are completely agentless. The only installation that would need to be carried out is the PXM desktop client, which you can see here. This does not require admin rights to install and can be available to be installed on Windows Windows endpoints, Mac endpoints, and can also be exposed over the web in an HTML5 interface for any third parties or remote people connecting in over the web. I'm going to go ahead and log in now. As you can see, I've also been prompted for a token code, which immediately we're ticking the multi-factor authentication. Cerium can integrate with any multi-factor authentication provider that supports Radius under the hood. However, that's not something I've got implemented in my lab. Logging in now, we will prompt users to log in to accept the fact that they're going to be recorded before they can even be logged in. As you can see, this is entirely customizable, so I'm going to have to click OK before I can get logged in. As you can see in the top left-hand side of the top left of the client, I can see that's the user that I've logged in with, and every device that I have access to is designatable by the thick blue banner. So going along, I've got a Palo Alto firewall, I've got Dell iDRAC, I've got domain controller, a number of different devices here. Also, as you can see, if I hover over the device, I can see the IP address, and from the PXM platform's polling system, that indicates clearly to me as an end user that that device is accessible. Also, I have a searching function here, so if I have devices in Munich, for example, if I know part of an IP address, but I'm not entirely sure what the server is, then I can search for that as well. So the searching is really designed to be flexible. If you have a number of devices, it's designed to be easy to use. The PXM platform has been built by sysadmins for sysadmins from the ground up, so we are catered to PAM and helping solve those problems that our development team have encountered firsthand before obviously making that transition to development. If I am to scroll down the client slightly and have a look at my domain controller as an example here, designatable by the computer icon with the large arrow indicates I can launch a recording session to any one of these MMC snap-ins, which I will be using my managed application server to broker that connection for me. But I can also launch native RDP, which I'm going to go ahead and do now. One thing you'll notice, depending on my access, which we'll cover slightly later on in the demo, depends on what account I have access to on that device. Within my lab environment, I have implemented the two-account model, which, as you can see, I've actually connected on in the top left-hand corner of the session now. I've actually connected onto my device here with my named domain admin account. So we're slowly starting to separate those accounts out now. Typically, this would be, the two-account model is often in enterprises and environments because that's what Microsoft recommends. Whereas for Cerium, we can bring those accounts into management. I've not had to enter that credential, but Cerium has actually done that for me. There's no way that I can debug the recorded session, as you can clearly see with the hatch red line alongside the outside of the window dictates whatever's happening in that session is being recorded. But it's also a nice variable to say, hey, look, this is a live session, take care with what you're doing. If I were to jump out of this session, for example, if I'm going to go ahead and troubleshoot an issue, as you can see, the red line has disappeared. So a Cerium session recording works by nature of we only record when the system detects a human interaction with that particular session. So Cerium has actually mapped me onto my domain controller using my named admin account, and I have native access on that device as that account, so I can go and start doing regular tasks, for example, or whatever it is I might be doing as part of my job. Just to go ahead and kind of prove that, I might want to run Notepad as admin. There's no real restrictions. I just have to accept the STUAC, but there we go. So I can go on and do privilege level stuff. But we might decide that that is too overprivileged for what the particular task or what it is that the person is doing, depending on their skill level or how much of an organization we trust those users. So what we can start to do is provision access to launch the map tools. So for example, I might have some, in a service desk environment, for example, I might have some lower level or lower skilled users, but I'm a bit tentative to give them full-blown native RDP access because they're either unskilled or underqualified. What I can do in that instance is provide them access with the same account. As you can see, I can either use the local admin or my named admin account here. Instead, I can actually go ahead and launch ADUC. So we're going to go ahead and launch the map server connection now. And this will grant me access to a recorded session only to the ADUC snap-in rather than full native access. I am experiencing a little bit of lag here. I can assure you this is only relevant to me because I'm running about 6 virtual machines under the hood of my laptop. And so that's why it's taking a little bit of time. Of course, in a production environment, you wouldn't necessarily encounter this sort of slowness here. But this is effective in restricting access to restricting people's level of access and starting to enforce that least privilege, so that users only have access to devices with a level of privilege that they need to carry out that task. There we go, that session is now opening. As I said, the slowness is only really encountered because of I'm running a number of virtual machines. And as you can see, I've got full-blown access to the Snap in there. I can do stuff in here because I've connected with an admin, but I don't have access to the actual server itself. So it's pretty straightforward. I can go in and do my AD user stuff in here and close that session off as normal. Furthermore, what Cerium can also do, and I feel is something that sets Cerium apart certainly from the other PAM vendors that I've worked with and worked for, is the enablement of task management. So you can say, I'll provision you access and you can go ahead and connect to your devices and that's going to be recorded. But what actually do you do with those credentials when you have access to them as a user, as an admin, as a DBA, as a help desk user, as a firewall engineer? What is it you actually do? Well, as you can see, designatable by the little blue cog icon in the left-hand side here, Cerium can provision a number of pretty common keeping the lights on tasks as Cerium, as we like to refer to them as. So, for example, if I'm a level 1 user, I don't really have too much AD management experience. However, Cerium can grant me access to standard AD user account management. So, for example, you might have a highly privileged user might end up walking off site. We don't know why. He's taken his laptop. He's got company secrets on that laptop. He's got access to the environment. We need to disable him, and we need to disable him now. So at Cerium, with the keeping the lights on task, we have a kind of interactive wizard where, as long as I know what the account name is that I need to disable, Cerium can actually go and do that on my behalf without me, as a user, needing to have any specific privileges on that target machine. So I know for the intents and purposes of the demonstration, my account is going to be called Disable Me, for example. I type that in, I choose my device, my domain controller, go ahead and execute that task and disable that account. So what I want you to think about is how often, or the hoops you would have to go through to carry out this task yourself, how long that might take. Through the separation of people from their passwords with Cerium, we can actually achieve that in 4 seconds without needing to go to a particular jump host or going in any other kind of different way. At this moment, we are stripping out the access and saying, well, based on your user role, based on your function, you don't need access to RDP, you don't even need access to the system directly. We're only going to grant you access on a task-based level. So going along the lines of separating out people from their passwords, as I said, removing any accounts that do not need to exist anymore in the environment, and working towards achieving the CAF framework. What I'm going to do now is actually launch a session into the web interface. So kind of gone over a standard user experience. So the user will be interacting with the client to retrieve access to the devices. Logging in now as a super admin. Of course, users can still log into the web interface. However, this is not something they typically do, and if they did, they'd only get access to the devices that they have access to. I do have some Unix servers in my environment, which will appear later on. However, I don't have access to that profile, so therefore I can't get anything that matches Unix. So go ahead now and having a look. The first thing that we'll take a look at is the profiles. The profile mechanism within a Cerium designates who gets access to what, how, and that level. As you can see on the left-hand side of the interface, I have a number of different profiles which could be relevant within your environments. You might see things like for infrastructure accounts. You noticed I had an account in here for my Dell iDRAC system. That's at the top of my client here. I can also have access for domain controller RDP access, which we're going to have a look at now. And then I've also got things for service desk users. So what tasks I will designate to my service desk level 1 users, and then so on and so forth. I might trust my level 3 engineers a little bit more than my level 1 engineers, so I give them full native RDP, and so on and so forth. We also have profiles for contractors, be it Windows or Unix guys, and then I've also got profiles in here for my internal and external firewalls. But for now, we're just going to have a look at the domain controller RDP access. Highlighting the profile and looking across to the right-hand side, we can see the enable window. So this is the time-based window, so enforcing a time-based access for when users can access the accounts. one thing that we can have a look at in my client here is my Palo Alto firewalls. I've restricted access to my Palo Alto firewalls until 6:30 at night every day, because if someone makes a change to my external firewalls, I don't want them breaking entire network connectivity for the office, because that would cause mayhem and bedlam. So therefore, I have restricted that to 6:30 at night, but everything else is pretty free reign. We can also see that session recording is enabled, so anything that connects over RDP on my domain controller is going to be recorded. And also, do I need to specify a change ticket for that access as well? But clicking into the profile, we can clearly see on the left-hand side what devices are in my profile. So the first thing we would do is look to add a device, and then select the level of access we would grant to that device. So again, really kind of start to strip out any unneeded access and only enforce least privilege access. So as we mentioned earlier, we had a look, and I logged in with my tom.hills_ADM account. Cerium has a feature again, which is something that I've not seen with other PAM vendors in this space, is the ability to map users to existing admin accounts. As long as the username matches a naming convention where there's a clear differentiator between either first name and last name, or first initial and last name, etc., etc. As long as that matches an underscore, either ADM or SA or X or whatever the naming convention is internally, then I can get mapped onto that device, add that account without me having to actually know what that password is. I can also connect with the local admin, or I can connect with some other accounts in there as well. But typically what Cerium would do, when we would do from day one, is we would actually implement the system in pass-through mode. So this enables the user to connect to a target device with the credentials that they've used to log into the desktop client here. And as long as those credentials exist on that target device, then we can launch recorded sessions to those devices. So at this point in time, we're actually saying to users, we know that PAM is a big change and that users are hesitant to change, and users might often put up walls and say, no, you're changing the way I work, I'm going to try as I can to circumvent that system. We'll say, well, okay, we're not going to change the way you work, but we're actually going to try and show you that this can make your working life a bit easier. You don't have to remember your privileged passwords anymore, and you don't have to connect to a jump host or a bastion and then connect elsewhere and go through multiple hops. So in the initial first kind of implementation, the first early days of an implementation of a Cerium platform, we put the system in pass-through mode. Also, it's good to know that Cerium also supports the provisioning and management on target devices of role-based accounts. So actually really, again, going to enforce that least privilege, where somebody might need to connect to a device, but then they need to do DNS level stuff. How can we prevent them from accessing something they're not supposed to? Because in Windows, you're either admin or you're not. We can, in this instance, create and manage role-based accounts with the role of DNS admin or print operator or network configuration operator on that device, and actually manage that credential ourselves as well, which we'll have a look at shortly. Again, this is something that I feel separates Cerium apart from other PAM vendors in this space, and not many of those other vendors will actually create accounts on the target systems. But once I've added my device, that appears within my profile, and I can access that device with the level of access I've granted. The next step we'll have a look at is the tools. If you go ahead and click on tools, this is where we say, okay, users, how do you connect to your device? This is what I can grant to you. So as you can see, I've enabled a number of the Active Directory snap-ins at the top, and also remote desktop. It's important to know that any change you make in this profile is actually propagated out in live to the clients. So for example, if you see that somebody has too much access and you want to start stripping that back, as you can see, RDP was there, it's not there anymore. So the changes you make in the profile on the back end are instant. Now I can no longer actually directly access that device with the native RDP. And then finally, also we look at the tasks. Well, what tasks do we want users to run? I've enabled a number of AD tasks that are available out of the box for me to use, but I can also do a number of DNS level tasks as well, checking for hotfixes that are installed. This could be quite useful for customers that do not have a vulnerability management system. I've been working recently with a client in the healthcare sector who got hit quite hard by WannaCry and then NotPetya straight after that. If they'd have been patched their servers, they would have mitigated the risk. However, they didn't have vulnerability management and immediately saw the value in being able to actually go ahead and have a task where we will go ahead and check for an installed hotfix. And then also DNS, as I mentioned, and stopping and starting services as well, the typical keeping the lights on tasks that we want people to do. But on the other side of that, we don't really want to give too much privilege away. So it is really enforcing that least privilege there. And then how do we grant access to the profiles and the devices within them? Simply by adding a user. This can be a AD user or a local user of the platform. And again, user groups, we can hook directly into groups within the PayXM platform or Active Directory as well. The next thing we're going to go and have a look at is once we've onboarded devices and accounts, what do we do with them? What's the state with them? How do we bring them under management? So here's all of my accounts here. So I have my device accounts. These are all the local accounts that Ethereum has either found on those devices or has created for me. And then also Active Directory accounts as well, static accounts and service accounts as well as something that we can manage as well. But when Ethereum when Ethereum profiles a device that we have told it about, immediately all of the accounts are reported back are given the state of unapproved, which means you're a human, you need to come in and actually decide whether you want me to manage these for you or not. And we'll talk about getting the states and changing the states in a minute. As you can see, here's all my unapproved. Throughout my interface as well, the interface has been designed for it to be easy to filter on and sort data by as well. So again, if you have lots of devices, we can clearly filter those and actually quickly get you to the ones that you're most interested in. The one thing you might notice here is that I've onboarded my Windows Emirates server here, and somebody has created a local account at some point in time and called it back. They tried to be clever in this instance. They might have thought with putting numbers in there that they'd spoof the monitoring system, but unfortunately, as I told Ethereum that is a device I wanted to manage, it's profiled that device and it's brought those accounts under management for me. What are my options here? Similarly, I've also got something called Ninja Root as well. Perhaps somebody's doing some funky stuff on Unix as well that I'm really not okay with. So what are my options here? Well, I can select those accounts, bulk select those. I can right click and I can change the state. So at this moment in time, we're starting to approaching the management of these accounts in a geared method. So you can either set them as approved, which means Ethereum, I want you to monitor these, but I don't really want you to, I'm not going to give you the password, just look after them and keep an eye on them effectively. Typically, break glass accounts are something that we use here. Setting the password as known. Now, in order to enable the privileged session management of devices, we would need to set the password as known. So if that password is written down somewhere or a user knows what it is, enter it here, and we can SSO them onto devices. The end goal would be to set these accounts as being fully managed, where Ethereum will actually go up to those devices and automatically reset their passwords. At that point, only Ethereum knows what those passwords are. Depending on the device's password policy will dictate as the complexity of the password that Ethereum enforces. Cisco routers, for example, support password characters of up to 128. No human is going to want to type them in, and if they are, they're not going to remember them. And if they do, it's probably because they've got them written down somewhere. So we can automatically randomize those passwords and enforce them on that device. So that would be the goal if I had a legitimate account that I wanted to manage. But this is also the steps that we will slowly start bringing those accounts under management and tightening them up from an access perspective. What we can also do in target on devices is lock those on those target devices. So it might be disable or lock or whatever the terminology is for the relevant device. If somebody comes forward and starts saying they can't access, then we can launch an investigation. But then what we can also do, and again, it's something that separates Ethereum apart from other PAM vendors, is actually delete those accounts. So we can actually go ahead and delete them from the target system, which will unprovision them from Ethereum, and actually delete them from the target device as well. Whereas other PAM vendors might go and say, hey, look, we found all these accounts, but we can't delete them, whereas Ethereum will actually go and talk to that target system and say, hey, look, go ahead and delete those passwords. So we can actually start clearing up any accounts that might have been created and then not deleted afterwards as well. Putting this in the healthcare customer that I've worked with recently, when we looked in and audited their domain admins group, we discovered that there was around 180 accounts within the domain admins group where there only should have been about 8. So immediately from deploying the virtual machine and hooking it into Active Directory, that took about an hour's time. From an hour from having the start of the installation, they're really starting to get value and actually restricting that access. So how do we go ahead and look at device recordings for the other part of the CAF framework? We'll have a look at our device access report. And under here is the full-on who did what, where and when. So as you can see, again, we can do lots of filtering on session start and end times. We can look at the device that they've accessed, the IP address they've come in from, what account they've used to log in, where they've gone out. So when we talk about Ethereum, we talk about users come in and accounts go out. So you can see that my user, Tom Hills, accessed the domain controller with his named admin account, and I used Active Directory users and computers, or I used RDP, or I used the browser, or whatever the protocol may be. And was that session recorded? And if so, is there a change ticket? Now this can be downloaded as a CSV file. So you get a CSV of all the session recordings. We can export the videos off Box if we want to store them for a longer period of time. We can also view them in screenshots, step by step, or frame by frame even, for the exact moment in time where somebody did a particular action. And also we can enforce a two eyes kind of session shadowing functionality where we can actually, if there were live sessions going through the box, a pair of eyes would appear next to my play button here, and I could actually effectively sit in on that session, shadow what that person's doing, and terminate it if I see them doing something that I don't agree with. What we can also do is slightly filter and search for any specific keystrokes as well that have been entered. So I know for a fact that we ran Notepad this morning, or this afternoon even. If I apply that filter, I can find all the sessions in which I ran Notepad. And as I mentioned earlier, the Ethereum session recording is only active when we detect human interaction with a session. I can see that I had probably maybe 9 seconds of session idle time. So my entire session was established for 1 minute 57 seconds, but actually we've only really recorded 1 minute 48 where someone has actually done something. So we're going to save our auditors some pain if they have to go and review this recording, when we can actually specify and show them when someone's been active on that session. I'm going to go ahead and play this session back now and set the playback speed to fastest. My session is loading. I'm just going to scroll this forward a little bit. So there we go. There's the full session recording there. And of course, that session recording will be relevant whether it's a client or whether it's the native access. As you can see, I'm going to start carrying out my server manager. And there's the session recording there. So it's important to note that, as mentioned, we are entirely agentless. Our session recording takes a screenshot every time we detect human interaction, rather than other PAM vendors in this space that do their video recording say they're agentless, but in fact they actually load a DLL as part of that connection, and sometimes, more often than not, it won't be cleanly removed afterwards, so they're not entirely agentless, whereas in Ethereum we are, because we take screenshots. So that covers our session recording. Of course, we can also export these videos off Box as well if we need to store them for a longer period of time. Next, we're going to go have a look at the management report. The management report is all about who's been accessing what and what their level is, so you can help to kind of tighten up your controls and see if, for example, people might have access to RDP, but they're not using it. So if they're not using it, we can remove it and actually mitigate that potential risk. But for example, you might get a call from your CIO or your CISO to say, what's our percentage of privileged account management? So what percentage of accounts are we managing and what's their status? As well as the users along the top and the devices and actually the local device accounts. I've got quite a scary ratio there. I've only got 25 devices that I manage, but I've got 111 local accounts across those devices. So immediately I can see that I need to do something there. But the percentage in the pie chart is the most interesting part here. So I can clearly see I've got 10% of my accounts are unapproved and 26% of them are approved, which could be a bit of a risk for me because I don't know what the passwords are for these accounts here. So it might be that they could be approved and be a break glass account and have a good reason for, but are they really going to be 26% of them going to be all be break glass? Probably not. The ideal would be to get as much green and dark green and light green as possible. What is the difference between fully managed and managed, I hear you ask? That's a question I get asked quite regularly. Fully managed is the state that Ethereum grants an account that it creates itself. So we looked previously at the role-based accounts, for example. If I was to create a role-based account, then that would be fully managed because it's an account that Ethereum has created itself. Managed is just the state that we give an account that Ethereum discovers and that exists in the environment already. So we would much prefer to see this more being in the green, and I've got quite a bit of an issue because I'm only managing 50% of those passwords. Going down further to the user activity, we can see what the top 5 tasks that have been executed. As you can see, I'm typically disabling AD accounts, but then also checking accounts existing, etc., and restarting the services. And then also device connections. So predominantly it's RDP, but I've got a bit of HTTPS, I've got some SSH going through the system as well, and also ADUC. But typically, if you saw that no one was using RDP, you could go and remove RDP from profiles. And again, enforcing least privilege from that perspective to say, RDP, you're not using it, that's a potential risk because you get full native access. If it's not something that's being used, take it away. It will be updated immediately, but also if someone's not using it, they're not going to notice who it's gone. And then finally, the next thing that we're going to take a look at is the template library. So how does Aserium connect to all of these target devices? This is under our template library. And it's, again, something that I feel separates Aserium apart from other PAM vendors in this space is our supportability of a wide variety of programming languages rather than enforcing a specific programming language which may or may not work on a specific device. So if we go ahead and if we filter on the vendor here, if we have a filter on Microsoft, we'll see all of the Microsoft servers that we support. So things like Hyper-V Manager and Office 365 and SQL Server, Management Studio, Domain Controller, Domain Member, etc., etc. We're going to go and have a look at the Domain Controller because this is the use case that we've had a look at in this demo. And just to show you under the hood what a particular task in Aserium looks like. Now, it may not be pretty to look at, so I'm going to try and gloss over this a little bit. Most of the tasks will run with their own XML file, so as you can see on the left-hand side. But I've also got some PowerShell scripting in here as well. If we come out of this example, and then if we might have a look, I believe the template is the Cisco template that has some Python scripting in it. I think it's the Active Directory one here. Go ahead and press edit. We can see that we've got some Python scripting in here as well. So the idea behind this is Aserium can support and comes with, if we exit out this because it's not that pretty to look at, if we look in the bottom right hand corner, if we clear out my filtering, we ship with 152 device templates available out the box, which again is quite a lot more than other vendors in this space. But also we support a number of different programming languages. So if you have some scripting capabilities in-house or you run some scripts yourselves and you want a bit more auditability around who's running those scripts and what they're doing, we can bring them under management and run them as a particular template or custom tasks as well, if that's something that you've created yourselves as well. So a plethora of programming languages that are supported out the box for a number of target systems as well. I think unless there are any questions, I think that brings me to the end of the product demonstration, and I will hand back to my colleague Mark.
Okay, thanks very much, Tom. So we covered a lot of ground there, which is another good reason for taking a look at the recording when you get the link to that, because that means you'll be able to go through at your own pace and kind of stop and spend a little bit more time just taking a look at the demo in more detail. So just to recap what we've seen there, at the heart of the PAM solution from Aserium is this idea that we separate human beings, the admins or the end users, from the critical infrastructure, the IT servers and services that they need to get their work done. And we call this concept identity in and rollout. You provide your identity to prove you are who you say you are, and as we saw with Tom's demo, that can include multi-factor authentication. And then through that mapping that was generated in the platform, we can say these are the services you're allowed, servers or devices or services you're allowed to connect to, and exactly what level of access you have to those services. So that separates out those valuable secret credentials, or those as administrator or privileged credentials from the human beings. And if the people can't see those passwords and usernames, then they can't easily be compromised either. We saw a lot there. I'm not going to go through this slide in any detail either, but it does show the breadth of the PXM platform from access management through task management, the session recordings. We didn't even have time to look at the behavior management and looking at how people's behavior might be anomalous, maybe doing something that they shouldn't be doing. And also map servers, so running applications within a totally protected environment. What that means, though, in terms of the context of the subject for today, the cyber assessment framework, is that the 5 key requirements that Alex highlighted earlier on. Sorry, look back, and again. There we go. We'll get there. Fingers. And well, thank you. The 5 key requirements that Alex highlighted earlier on from the framework to have dedicated separate accounts for privileged citizen access. Well, we saw that as Tom had his tom.hills_admin account, to which he didn't have any direct access, so that completes that first requirement. The second one was the time-bound accounts. You can set up access windows to say that this person can only log on between Monday and Wednesday of next week. You can have that kind of control, and it happens to be between 9 and 5, or maybe out of working hours, whatever your requirement is for that connection. Being able to review access rights and update them as part of a new hire or leaver process. Well, we saw all of the access that people were having. We had all the full audit trails around what tasks were being, or what actions were being taken during those sessions. Strong authentication. We saw how multi-factor authentication is required to be able to connect to the platform before you can start doing any work. And then we also show how we're tracking access on accounts that are used during the day. And we saw those potentially dangerous accounts, the backdoor accounts, or whatever that might have been created that nobody knew about. And then finally, the requirement for any privileged activity being recorded and being reviewed regularly. Well, we saw that with the strong audit trails, and particularly with the session recordings. And you can keep those for as long as you wish. Some people keep them forever. Some people keep them for a rolling 30 days or whatever, depending upon your requirements. And you can go back and see exactly what people were doing in each of those sessions, which can be a very useful training tool or diagnostic tool, as well as just audit trail to say, did anybody do anything wrong, bad in these days? Okay. So let's get some recommendations going before we get into some Q&A. I think we've already given quite a number of tips here. The first thing to do is get a grip on where you currently are, usually the most important step in any project. Now, primary data source for that will probably be Active Directory in most cases. And Assyrian, the PXM platform, can connect to AD and pull those accounts in, and then you can start reviewing and cleaning up those privileged accounts, which ones are actually needed. In one of our clients, they did this exercise. They're a fairly large organization, but they very quickly found more than 36,000 privileged accounts across their estate. Now, does anybody anywhere have a complete and comprehensive list of 36,000 accounts and know exactly what they're all being used for? Unlikely. So, but it does give you an idea of the potential scale of the problem. But a tool like Assyrian can help you get a grip on those, and you start filtering that list down to, say, looking at particular geographical locations or organizational units, and start getting a grip team by team, so you can build up to take the whole inventory under control. Where you identify those privileged accounts, start to separate out the real users from those admin accounts. They don't really need direct access. Now, at first, that can seem like a bit of a shock. If you're an administrator and you say, well, I always log in as admin, I always have full power on those servers, and I'm going to lose that as I move to something like PXM. Although that's a reasonable, I guess, first instinctive reaction, actually, once you start using it, you realize that actually not having direct access to the box is a really good thing. Not only does it tick the box to be compliant, but as you saw from that list that Tom had of all the servers and services he could connect to, and his list was particularly busy because of, obviously it's a demonstration system, rather than having to remember what's the name of the server I need to connect to, what are the credentials on that particular server, or going and asking somebody what the login is for that server, I have that all presented to me, and I can filter that list, and I can get one-click access through to a server without any more delay. So, that's actually streamlining and simplifying my day. And then once you've got control of your maybe at the same time, once you've got that kind of control, you understand what accounts people are actually using, then really understand what third-party access do people need. Do they need full access to a complete server, or do they need access just to a particular function on that? I mean, the Active Directory user console that Tom looked at didn't need the full server, just needed that one function. And when do they need that access? So get control over your third-party access. And importantly, this is never a one-hit and you're done kind of thing. It's a repetitive process that needs to be constant. And that's something that the CAF framework highlights. Is this has to be a continual review of activity. So moving on to the next slide, Tom, thank you. We do have lots of resources that you may find of use, as well as the link to the recording. We'll send out a link to a white paper that we have, which dives into these requirements and issues in a little bit more detail. It's called Addressing Access Control in the NHS. although in fact most of the content there is actually applicable to all of the essential services that we've talked about today. So I think you'll find that useful. You'll also find on Assyrium.com lots of other assets, including the ability to download the full product that Tom's just been showing you. We call it PXM Express as a way of getting you up to speed very fast, and you can use this product in production use for free for up to 25 devices. So if you want to get a feel for what PXM Express can do, perhaps start with a small team, then PXM Express is great. You can download it really easily by going to the Assyrium.com website, and there's a bunch of tutorial videos there that walk you through installation and configuration. And I'd also point you to the Razor Secure website at razorsecure.com, which particularly focuses more on some of the transportation, kind of essential services, and the particular challenges that they have there. Alex mentioned some of these earlier on. You know, it's not just about the NHS, but it does cover a number of different industries, and some of them do have some different requirements as well. So let's go to Q&A. I think we've used up quite a lot of time, so I just want to do a couple of really quick questions. Alex, just to clarify that last point, I think you're saying that different industries do have slightly different requirements. How does that affect compliance, and what do people have to worry about there in getting compliance in different industries?
So the big thing is that each industry does have its own competent authority. So it's always worth going and reviewing the information that's been released by the competent authority. So, for example, the Civil Aviation Authority for Aviation, they've taken an entirely different approach, and it's all based on this CAP 1574 document. So they don't use the cyber assessment framework in the same way that some other industries do. But Rail, as another example, they've just taken the cyber assessment framework verbatim, and so that is what you need to comply with. So it's always worth looking up the industry-specific advice to understand how will it apply to me, and what am I expected to comply with for this particular industry.
Okay. And do these competent authorities, do they come out and do assessments? Do they come and audit?
So no, they don't. You essentially do the audit yourself, and then you submit the information to the competent authority, and they're the ones that are responsible for interpreting what you've provided them. And to be honest, they're not expecting everybody to be green in every category. That's a bit unreasonable for any security company, even the most competent ones. So you shouldn't be afraid of being amber in some, but the reality is the advice and the key areas that you can improve your security are pretty consistent with no matter which framework you're looking at. So privileged access is critical.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, thank you. Tom, quick question for you. We talked about Active Directory quite a bit today. Are there other sources of user accounts that people could bring in if they're not using Active Directory, or as well as?
Absolutely. So, as mentioned, users and identities come into Assyrium and accounts go out. Where are those accounts? They can be Active Directory, and they can also be local accounts across Windows, but also for Unix and firewalls, networking kit, databases, etc. So if those accounts exist within a CSV file, or they're written down somewhere, we can put them into a CSV file and upload them into the PXM platform for the automated parcel management and launching of secure recorded sessions as well.
Okay, super. Thank you for that. I think we've taken quite a lot of time, so I'd like to wrap up now. Thank you to Alex and Tom. Great content there. Thanks for answering those questions. As I said earlier, we'll be sending out an email follow-up in the next few days with links to the recording and links to the other resources. Please do visit razorsecure.com and Assyrium.com. If you have any questions, then please, or any feedback on this recording or the session, please do get in touch. We are starting a whole new series of webinars coming up, which you'll be hearing about in the next few days as well. So I look forward to speaking to you again on one of those. But until then, thanks very much for your time today. Hope you found this useful, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, and goodbye.